Hey loves, so we are talking about basic human relationships. This is still part of the disconnection portion of chapter 1. I know we're going through a lot here. All right, so let's get started. It appears that the trust and the safety of relationships is learned in stages like ripples on a pond. First is the relationship with the mother self, then the mother as other, aka the adoptive mother, then the father and the rest of the family, rippling out to relatives and frequently seen friends, the community, and society. When the first stage is interrupted, so taken from the biological mother, even with a substitute mother being provided right away, the ripple effect is disturbed. The interruption of the first relationship alters the perception and meaning of the attachment which connects an individual to the community and society. Adoptees often describe themselves as floating, never feeling connected to anyone, alone, even when surrounded by friends or in the arms of a lover. There's no sense of belonging, of fitting in. Sometimes there is no sense of existing. So pause right there. As we talked about in the disconnection portion, I mentioned the blank slate theory and how it's been disproven, and I've also mentioned the fourth trimester idea of needing your biological mother. Again, that's just the beginning of the 3 months, but we're talking that cannot be substituted for an adoptive parent, right? Our brains are forever altered, and that is the issue with adoption. Well, it's one issue, I should say. It's one psychological issue. There's far more that we constantly talk about, but that's it. Our brains are so much altered that even as a newborn, we feel abandoned. We feel like we can't trust people. We don't feel like we belong with our biological family, and we don't feel like we belong with our adoptive parents most of the time. Again, I'm not going to speak for everyone. I know some do feel that way, but it's just kind of like you're all alone, surrounded by thousands of people, and they're all telling you one thing, and I call this the capacity, right? They don't have the same experience because they were all biologically kept, right? So it's this privilege, like, oh, don't worry, you have your family, you were chosen and all this, but it doesn't feel that way. We weren't chosen. We were, from our birth mothers, I wouldn't say we were abandoned. I know that they try to give us the best life possible. Yes, that is a narrative that needs to stop, right? It's not. But they were trying to do what was best in the situation and coerced and all this. They were lied to. But at the same time, our adoptive parents are like, well, we want a baby and, this is the only way. Most of the time they're infertile. We chose you. No, like there are 101 babies to there's 111 adoptive families searching for a baby for every one available child. Think about that. If we weren't available at that moment, they would have taken anyone else. Any other baby. They don't care. So we weren't really chosen. Anyway, continuing on. Adoptees are very good at sabotaging relationships by distancing themselves from their parents via various destructive behaviors, then feeling an immediate need to get into another relationship. Sometimes the end of a relationship causes a sense of loss beyond the norm, as if the mother has disappeared all over again. They fall again into the abyss. There is an urgency to get into another relationship immediately in order to still the terror of the abyss. But then the anxiety begins all over again. Will they leave me? Herman says, again, Judith Herman, says of trauma victims, quote, their capacity for intimacy is compromised by intense and contradictory feelings of need and fear, unquote. There is a desperate yearning for intimacy, yet an intense fear of allowing that kind of connection. So I do find that's often true that adoptees often, and I say often, right? So like majority, have found it difficult to be in relationships, especially if that partner is not understanding of all of this, right? On top of that, I will also add, and I can only speak to the female, the women adoptees, and I'm sure there are male adoptees that feel this way too. From what I've heard, and again, this is also my experience, is that as a female adoptee, we have this biological need to have a family, and so we might often rush into relationships to build our own family, right? And when I say build, it doesn't mean that we're necessarily adopting. There are some that were adopted and do become adoptive parents, or maybe vice versa. They were birth parents and are adopted. There's a smaller group of them, but they do exist. But what I mean is, like, we have this need to have our own children, to have our own family, right? So I'm going to give my family my story about I had this desperate need. I had this desperate want to be pregnant at such a young age, to have a family. I don't know. Now I can tell you that, like, it wasn't my biological clock, right? I'm now in my early 30s, and as much as I want a second child, I'm good. Like, I've, I'm okay. I'm not like desperate to have a second child, but that need was to fulfill an emotional void that I had due to biological family, right? And so when I did eventually get pregnant and I had my son, I'm not going to lie, it definitely helps in many ways, for that emotional void. And that's not to say I don't have still issues that I'm dealing with. I'm in therapy and I'm obviously talking this all out with you guys. But he is the only biological member I've ever met in person that I can remember. Now, granted, right, I obviously met my biological mother when I was born. I've been in reunion since I was 21, so right around the time that I was at the end of my pregnancy and giving birth. But I've never met any of my biological family in person, ever. I've seen pictures. I've had pictures my entire life. But yeah, I mean, there's something about it that, I look at my son and I'm just amazed. I'm amazed by the way he looks just like me. And, obviously it's the genetic mirroring, and then how, his cute little attitude is like me, and all these little things. And it's like, I didn't get to grow up with that because I didn't have that direct genetic mirroring. I didn't get to really have my culture around me. I didn't get to have a lot of these things that I'm trying to provide for my son. And it's tough, and I just want to make it clear that, yes, even having a biological child, whether you're adopted or not, is selfish because you're fulfilling your want and your need. Your child isn't being asked to be born. You don't get consent to your egg to have a child, right? It's a want to have a family. But the difference is that when you have a biological child, you're not then praying for another family to be broken up to fulfill your wants and desires. You see what I'm saying? So even though it's still selfish, there's another portion to it. Anyway, we will be back next time with the value of self. I hope you guys are enjoying this read. It is long. It is very informative. but it's going to take us a very long time to get through this book, so bear with me.